September 13th, 1942. The sun struggles to break through a sky thick and black, not with clouds, but with smoke. Stalingrad is no longer a city. It is an ocean of fire and ruins, a monument to the apocalypse. For days, Hermann Göring's Luftwaffe has hammered the city without mercy, dropping thousands of tons of incendiary and high-explosive bombs. Tens of thousands of civilians lie dead beneath the rubble of their own homes. Now, from this hell of broken brick and twisted steel emerges Friedrich Paulus's German Sixth Army. Its infantry and panzer divisions launch their first massive assault on the heart of the city. The Soviet defenses, already weakened and disorganized, crumble. Entire battalions are annihilated in a matter of hours. Panic spreads like a plague. In a bunker on the eastern bank of the Volga River, General Vasily Chuikov is summoned before the front commander. The situation is desperate. The Soviet 62nd Army, the unit tasked with defending the city, is in tatters, on the verge of collapse. Chuikov is offered the command. It is not an honor. It is a death sentence. The expectation is that he and his army will not last more than 24 hours. As Chuikov crosses the Volga on a barge under ceaseless bombardment, he sees the city in flames. He sees the wounded being evacuated, their faces masks of terror. He feels the ground tremble under the constant impact of shells. The air smells of burnt flesh, cordite, and the most absolute despair. The defenders are isolated, their backs to the wide river and the German devil roaring before them. Hell is not a metaphor. It is the tangible reality for every soldier trapped on the West Bank. Chuikov has arrived to command an army of ghosts in a dead city. Adolf Hitler's obsession with Stalingrad was both strategic and deeply personal. The city, a major industrial and transport hub on the Volga River, was a gateway to the rich oil fields of the Caucasus, the primary objective of the 1942 German summer offensive. But above all, it bore the name of his arch-nemesis, Joseph Stalin. Taking the city would be a propaganda coup of incalculable value. Driven by this fixation, Hitler diverted crucial forces from the advance toward the Caucasus and directed them at Stalingrad, ordering it to be taken at any cost. The man entrusted with this task, General Friedrich Paulus, was the personification of the Prussian staff school, methodical, meticulous, and brilliant at planning on a map. His plan to take the city was a reflection of his personality, a systematic, crushing advance using Germany's overwhelming superiority in firepower and air support to clear the city sector by sector, building by building. He approached the battle as if it were an engineering problem, an equation that could be solved with the application of enough brute force. Both Paulus and the German High Command operated under a veil of arrogance. They catastrophically underestimated the Soviet will to fight. They had watched the Red Army crumble and retreat all summer. They believed the defenders of Stalingrad were on the brink of final collapse. They saw the battle not as a decisive confrontation, but as a mopping-up operation, the final phase before a certain victory. They could not conceive that the Soviet soldiers, with their backs to the Volga and Stalin's brutal Order No. 227, not one step back, ringing in their ears, would fight with the ferocity of cornered animals. They did not realize they were not entering a city to conquer it, but a trap of their own making, a labyrinth of ruins that would neutralize their greatest strengths and slowly consume one of the finest formations in the entire Wehrmacht. They completely ignored the growing threat on their extended and vulnerable flanks, held by poorly equipped and demoralized Romanian and Italian allied troops. Pride and doctrinal rigidity were blinding them to the abyss opening at their feet. In his underground bunker, with the earth constantly trembling from explosions, Vasily Chuikov faced a brutal truth. To fight a conventional battle against the Sixth Army was suicide. The Germans dominated the sky with their Stuka dive bombers. Their artillery was superior and more accurate. Their tanks, though hampered by the rubble, were still a formidable force. Every time the Soviet defenders tried to form a traditional defensive line, they were pulverized. The challenge was existential. How could a numerically inferior army, with lighter weaponry and no air support, survive such an onslaught? The answer did not come from a military manual. It was born of desperation and Chuikov's tactical genius. In the first chaotic hours of his command, he formulated a doctrine that would change the nature of urban warfare forever. His order was radical and, at first glance, suicidal. Embrace the enemy. He ordered all his units to close the distance with the Germans to grenade-throwing range. The front lines were to be so close that a soldier could hear his enemy's breath on the other side of a wall. The logic was brilliant in its simplicity. By maintaining this extreme proximity, Chuikov neutralized Germany's greatest advantages. The Luftwaffe could not bomb without risking the annihilation of its own troops. Artillery became ineffective for the same reason. The battle ceased to be a long-range engagement and became a brutal, citywide, hand-to-hand brawl. But this tactic required a new kind of soldier. Chuikov broke up the traditional platoon and company formations and created small storm groups. Teams of 6 to 8 men, armed to the teeth with PPSH-41 submachine guns, sacks of grenades, knives, and sharpened spades. These groups were the cells of the new war. Their mission was not to hold a line, but to infiltrate, ambush, terrorize. They moved through the rubble like ghosts, using sewers, basements, and the skeletons of buildings to appear behind German lines. They would strike a machine gun post, toss a dozen grenades into a cellar full of resting soldiers, and vanish before the enemy could react. Chuikov's decision to transform the battle into this Rattenkrieg, or War of Rats, was the turning point. It not only saved his army from annihilation, but turned the city of Stalingrad into a meat grinder that would consume the German Sixth Army. October and early November, 1942. The battle for Stalingrad reaches a crescendo of ferocity that defies human comprehension. The fight is now centered on the Northern Industrial District, a complex of giant factories that have become the most contested fortresses on the planet. The Tractor Factory, the Barricadi Ordnance Factory, and the Red October Steelworks are now the epicenters of the war. Here, the front line is not a line on a map. It is the corridor of a factory hall, the mangled iron of a destroyed machine tool, the ceiling separating one floor from the next. The Germans, with their methodical brutality, advance during the day, using flamethrowers to clear the workshops, followed by tanks that smash down walls. But the night belongs to Chuikov's storm groups. They emerge from tunnels and sewers, counterattacking with savage ferocity, retaking the lost ground meter by meter. One German soldier wrote in a letter home, "We have captured the kitchen, but the fight for the living room and the bedroom continues." Survival becomes a primal struggle. Rations are almost non-existent. The Soviet defenders, isolated on the West Bank, survive on what they can find. The rats that infest the ruins become a crucial source of protein. Eating rats is not an anecdote. It is the daily routine that keeps men alive for 96 hours, a week, a month. Anonymous heroes and legends are born in this hell. In the city center, a platoon led by Sergeant Yakov Pavlov occupies a 4-story apartment building. With a handful of men, they defend it for nearly 2 months against countless assaults by tanks and infantry. Pavlov's house becomes a symbol of indomitable resistance. On Paulus's staff maps, the building is simply marked as a fortress. Meanwhile, in the ruins, a new kind of terror stalks the Germans. Chuikov has unleashed his snipers. Men like Vasily Zaitsev, a shepherd from the Urals, become masters of hunting in the urban jungle. Every German officer, every sapper, every mortar crew that exposes themselves for a second risks a bullet from nowhere. By mid-November, the Sixth Army has captured 90% of the city. They have reached the bank of the Volga at several points. But Chuikov and the exhausted yet defiant remnants of the 62nd Army cling to a few slivers of land, sometimes no more than 100 meters wide. Their motto, "There is no land for us beyond the Volga," has become a literal truth. They have bled the Sixth Army to a near standstill. They have accomplished their mission. And now, the stage is set for Stalin's masterstroke. The breaking point of the Battle of Stalingrad did not occur in the ruins of the city, but on the vast, unprotected steppes to the northwest and south. While Friedrich Paulus and the entire German Sixth Army were obsessed with taking the last few meters of ground in the city, making the strategic error of concentrating their strength on a single point, Stalin, Zhukov, and Vasilevsky had been weaving a net around them. For months, in absolute secrecy, the Soviet High Command had amassed a colossal force on the German flanks. Over 1 million men, 1,500 tanks, and thousands of cannons were assembled, ready to strike the weakest points of the Axis line, the sectors held by the Romanian, Italian, and Hungarian armies. These Allied troops, poorly equipped, with few anti-tank weapons and rock-bottom morale, stood no chance against what was coming for them. On November 19th, 1942, the trap was sprung. Operation Uranus was unleashed. At dawn, an artillery barrage of apocalyptic violence pulverized the Romanian defenses in the northwest. Immediately afterward, hundreds of T-34 tanks, followed by masses of infantry, poured through the gap. The Romanian lines disintegrated in hours. The next day, a similar offensive was launched from the south, crushing the other Romanian flank. Panic seized the German high command, but it was too late. The two Soviet armored pincers advanced at breathtaking speed across the open steppe, meeting almost no resistance. Their objective was the small town of Kalach-na-Donu, west of Stalingrad, where the key bridge over the Don River was located. In just 4 days, on November 23rd, the spearheads of the two Soviet fronts met at Kalach. The encirclement was complete. In an astonishing turn of fate, the hunter had become the prey. The entire German 6th Army and parts of the 4th Panzer Army, between 300 and 350,000 men, were trapped. The news was so incredible that Paulus, in his headquarters, refused to believe it at first. But the harsh reality soon set in. They were surrounded, isolated, and doomed. Vasily Chuikov's suicide mission was over. His stubborn and brutal resistance in the ruins of Stalingrad had perfectly served its strategic purpose. For 2 months, he and the men of the 62nd Army had acted as an anvil. They had pinned, absorbed, and bled dry the most powerful strike force of the Wehrmacht, allowing the hammer of Operation Uranus to fall with devastating force. The battle for Stalingrad would continue for another 2 months, as the 6th Army, trapped in the Kessel or cauldron, was slowly strangled and annihilated by starvation, cold, and constant Soviet attacks. But its fate had been sealed in those 4 days in November. When Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus finally surrendered on February 2, 1943, the full scale of the German catastrophe was laid bare. Of the nearly 350,000 Axis soldiers trapped in the encirclement, only 91,000 starving, frozen specters remained. Of those, only about 5,000 would survive the Soviet prison camps and return home years later. Stalingrad was the undisputed turning point of the Second World War. For Germany, it was a military and psychological catastrophe from which it would never recover. The myth of the Wehrmacht's invincibility was shattered forever. For the Soviet Union, it was a victory of legendary proportions, a triumph that galvanized the nation and proved to the world that the Third Reich could be defeated. The tenacity of Vasily Chuikov, general stubbornness, and the incredible resilience of the men and women who defended the city became an eternal symbol of courage and sacrifice against impossible odds. Their fight in the cellars and sewers, eating rats to survive while clinging to every meter of their land, not only saved a city, but changed the course of history. In the ruins of Stalingrad, the Nazi advance was not just stopped, it was broken.